Record on this computer. Okay, we should be recording. Let's see, this is March 29th, 2018. This is the scheduled class meeting of ITSE 2309 at Collin College. Let's see, the objective tonight is going to be to review. I'm going to take this headset off, leave the mic on. The objective tonight is to review the questions or the exercises from Module 8, I believe. I see students are having a lot of trouble with them. I did want to check one thing with Module 8. I have made some changes there. Spring holiday, I don't think I need that one or that one. Well, and going to the modules and then to Module 8. Module 8 covers the subqueries. Now, the subqueries in general don't give students a whole lot of problems, except deciding what kind of a subquery to use. And so that's what I'm going to try to focus on today. I'm going to try to give you an idea of how I think when I start writing SQL code, because most of the time when I am using a subquery, I could also use something else besides a subquery. I could use a table join, inner join, outer join, or a group by and accomplish the same thing. It doesn't matter really which one you use. They are all of equal weight and value in terms of SQL. SQL doesn't run any faster or slower most of the time, regardless of what you do. Okay, because SQL is free to do anything it wants to do. There are some times that you can actually slow it down by doing certain things, but I'm going to say right now, whether you want to put it into a subquery or a table join, it really doesn't matter. Okay, but it matters in this class because I want you to be able to do either one. Okay, so I'm going to go to page 4, correlated subqueries. And I had I had one here that where I this one has been edited, and this one is a correlated subquery. Now that it has changed a little bit because I accidentally had a max in the outside and a group by. A correlated subquery is essentially equivalent to a group by. It is very similar to a group by. So this correlated subquery is very similar to this one up here, but this the correlated subquery, this subquery right here and this select line with a group by are essentially the same queries. They will give you the same output. So if we say select vendor ID invoice total from invoices, now notice that I have invoices and I have renamed invoices. I could have called it I1 or II or something like that. I called it INV outside because that is the invoices table that is the name, that's the outside name for it. This is what makes it a correlated subquery. Where the invoice total is in, this one says select the max invoice total. from invoices as invoice inside, where invoice outside vendor ID equals the invoice inside vendor ID. And it is this line right here that makes this a correlated subquery, because it has one table, one invoice on the outside, and one on the inside. Now, this is other ways. There are other ways I can do it and get around it and never use a correlated subquery. I could, a table join, a self join of a table is very close to a correlated subquery. A group by is very close to a subquery. For example, this second one down here, select vendor ID, the max, as my max, from invoices. And notice this one, I did not have to say as invoice outside. I copied it and I left that on there. I should have just taken that off. Just from invoices would have been fine, because there's no reason to rename it. Group by vendor ID, order by vendor ID. Order by is not required. Okay, just the group by. So in this case, the correlated subquery gives me the group by. What will this do? It will take all of the vendor IDs and collapse them into one, and then it will find the maximum of those. Okay, obviously, this one is a lot shorter. Let me go ahead and edit it. Let me take that out. This one does not need invoice outside on it at all. Just from invoices is fine. So this one is a lot shorter, but here it is nonetheless in terms of a correlated subquery. Now, notice that the subquery, if I tried to run the subquery of a correlated subquery, if I try, most of the time a subquery, I can run it as a standalone subquery, but I cannot do that here. You see, why not? I can't run that by itself. If I try to execute that, I'm going to get an error, because INV outside would be undefined. So I have one table defined outside of the query and one table defined inside of the inner query. And so I'm pairing them up and looping with inside of that. So essentially that is the same thing as saying group by vendor ID. Now, not just because it's a correlated subquery doesn't make it a group by vendor ID, but most of the time when I have a group by, I can do that. The reason this lends itself to a subquery is because everything comes from one table. When I have everything coming from one table, I like to think of a subquery. If I have things coming from multiple tables, I'm going to have a table join in there to get both tables in the output. I cannot get two tables in the output from a subquery. If I have output from two tables, I'm going to have a table join. No way around it. Okay. But if all my output comes from one table, then I have the choice. Many times I like subqueries. Let's go take a look at this one. Let's see. I guess we'll look at okay. I'm going to look at these exercises from chapter 6. So this is, I don't think that this isn't module 6. This is module 8, actually. Chapter 6. It is possible that you have a slightly different row count than I do. Sometimes I mess with my data, and I have been known to change that creation script. I try to go through them every couple of years and double check and make sure that those row counts that I'm giving you are still accurate. If I tell you that I'm returning 33 rows and you get 34 or 32, just take a good look at it and see if you think it's right. It probably is. Okay. Anyway. The following, this is a table join, and it returns a list of vendor names who have at least one. So vendor names have to come from the vendors table, and this has to be validated against the invoices table. Before this chapter, the only way we knew how to do that was to do a table join. Okay. And here is the table join. Select distinct vendor name. So it's a table join. And here we are. I've taken the distinct out of it. So select the vendor name from vendors, inner join invoices. So I'm only going to see those vendors and the invoices, for that matter, that participate in this guy. I will not see vendors with no invoices, i.e. childless parents. I will not see invoices with an invalid vendor, i.e. invalid children. And I do have one in there, order by vendor name. If I do not have the distinct clause in there, notice that this is the output from it. Notice that I get multiple values. So every time that that the vendor, that the invoice ID changes, I'm going to show the vendor ID. I could also do a group by, but if I have the distinct, now I get 33 rows. Questions? Okay. And if you read the instructions, they ask you to now write this as a subquery. Would it be exactly the same thing? Well, it's a table join. Now, if you think about it, what do I want to get? Okay. I always hate it when I get over. What is this? Select vendor ID from invoices. Don't have a semicolon on there and probably should, but if I looked at that and I selected the vendor ID from invoices, what do I get? Notice that I get 114 rows. Okay. What if I were to put a distinct on that? Just for the fun of it. And notice the number of rows that I got down here. I don't know whether you can see that or not, but I returned 34 rows, which was exactly the same thing as I got on the join. This is the subquery. So I want to select from the vendors table. So select the vendor name from the vendors table where the vendor ID is in this. Okay, so it's going to be a select from what table? Vendors, where vendor ID is in. Oh, don't forget your parentheses are required. I like to see the parentheses lining up like that. And then an order by. Because if you don't have order by, then what can I order by? Well, I've only got one value there to order by. Now, you should not put a distinct in a subquery that you're testing for. Is it in there? Because it's either in the set or it's not. It doesn't care whether it's distinct or not. So distinct doesn't help me any putting it there. What do I need to suppress? Not so much the vendor IDs here in this subquery, but I need to suppress this wouldn't do anything for me. I could say distinct there. I'm going to get 34 rows. But if I don't say distinct up above in the outer subquery, I'm going to get duplicate rows. So I'm going to see blue cross, blue cross, blue cross. Because they will have the vendor ID will match. It doesn't matter how many I have, if it's either in or it's not in. If I have 1, if I have 10, it really doesn't matter a bit. Doesn't cost the system any more to return more of them. It's very fast at that kind of stuff. So we typically do not put a distinct in the subquery. First thing, it doesn't do what we want it to do. Because if, let's say I have a 3 in there, I'm going to return every vendor name where the vendor ID is 3. So if I have 3 or 4 of those in the invoices table, it isn't going to change anything. Okay, questions? You should get 34 rows on that one. You should get the same number of rows there. You should get the same output on the subquery as you do on the table join. Most of the time, subqueries and table joins can be written. Most subqueries can be written as table joins. And you say, well, why are we doing them then? Well, because I'm main. Questions? Okay, let me bring up my. I'm going to check my inbox from time to time, those of you. So if you need me to turn your audio on, put my headset on, just send me a message on Canvas, and I will do so. Okay, questions on number 1. It's a straightforward subquery. The subquery comes from the invoices table. It is exactly the same thing as an inner join, by the way. It's exactly the same cost of operation and all of that. So this, we're just realizing this inner join, and that is not a correlated subquery. If it had a group by in it, it would be a correlated subquery. Let's look at number 2. Number 2, I have edited. I don't know why I get 18 rows. Write a select statement that answers this question. Which invoices have a payment total that is greater than the average payment total? Okay, a payment total that is greater than the average payment total. Now, this one is meat for a subquery and difficult to do in a table join. Anytime I'm being asked to find the minimum, the maximum, the average, greater than the average, how many are less than the maximum, right? Anytime I'm being asked to compare something to an aggregate function, the other thing to notice here, everything we want comes from one table. Okay? So, which invoices? What do I mean, which invoice? I guess anytime I say which invoices, return the primary key, right? So if I say which record, I'm talking about the primary key is all I need. If I have that, I can find anything. So in other words, just return the invoice ID. Oh, I think okay. It says return the invoice number and payment total then. Invoice number is not the primary key. So I'm assuming then that I could have several offices around and they could have the same invoice numbers. So that might be the case. There's nothing stopping me from in the database from having a duplicate invoice number. I don't have any invoice number. I don't believe I have any duplicates. But if I did, that could throw a hitch into my get along here. Okay. So I want to return the invoice number and payment total for each invoice. Order by payment total, order by is pretty straightforward. Doesn't have anything to do with the subquery. So what am I interested in is I want to know so this is number 2. I don't know why it's giving me a red line there. Usually means I don't have a use. Hopefully that gets rid of it. Nope, don't know what the problem with it is, and when I don't know why it's giving me that red line, I just get over it. So this is the average payment total. Execute, and there it is. I don't care what it is, it's not important to me. But I want everything that is above that. Questions? I want it where the payment total is greater than that. Okay. So my query then looks like select something from what? Again, from one table, invoices, where now me. Now, do I want to say in here? What? Should I say in? Am I looking for the invoices? Go back and read that question one more time. Am I looking for the invoice totals that are equal to the average? Greater than the average. Okay. So in and not in is pretty good. When you think of in and not in, equal is what you want. You could say equal, but in is better. In it's more. It is consistent with the set operations. It's either in that set or it's not. Now, if I'm going to say greater than, I could say greater than, and it would work. But I should say greater than any or all. One of the two, not both of them like that. So do I want it to be greater than any value in that set or greater than all of the values in that set? Well, there's only one value in that set. So does it matter? In this case, it does not. When it does not matter, and very seldom do I ever use any, when it doesn't matter, when I only have one value there, I just say all. Now, this would work if I did not say all, but I would have a problem with it because invoice total is a number, and the value on this side is a table. Now it would work. It would change it from one to the other, and it would understand, would quote, quote, understand what you wanted to do, and it would work. So I want to see all there, preferably. If you said any, I wouldn't count it wrong, because you know there's only one value there. So I can run this one, this subquery, and one of the hallmarks of a subquery, of a non-correlated subquery, is that I can run just that subquery. So I ran the subquery and I got this number, whatever it is, $1,866.55 and 8 mils. So I'm looking for any values greater than that. So where the invoice total is great, excuse me, that's payment total, isn't it? Payment total, not invoice total. Okay. Questions? So I'm leaving it to you to flesh it out, but I'm talking about the subquery. You okay with it, Kathy? Yep. Let's take a look at another one. Number 3. As an example, I gave you this correlated subquery. By the way, I edited this subquery, so you'll notice that I put a note down there that I edited the question today. So this one has changed. Please make a note. This question has changed a little bit. I changed this. I used to have max invoice total up here. So if you have copied it and saved it, you should go ahead and reload it.
I just downloaded it. I don't see that comment. So did you see it?
Well, I just downloaded it like a minute ago. I didn't see where you updated it to chapter 8.
Is it the Word attachment or the?
It should be in the Word.
I didn't see that change.
Let me see it. I don't know, being told that they're not seeing the changes. Let me go make sure. Let's see, where do I need to go here? I need to go back to the module. I'm just going to go straight to modules. And I want to see the exercises. There may be. Let me delete that. It could be that I didn't refresh the page. Underline. Oops. There. Okay, now let me do a save. Okay, now when I click on chapter 6 exercises, would you go there and click on that exercise right there? And I can say open with Word. Two, three. I'm not seeing it either. Okay, what's going on here? In a few minutes, I'm going to turn this off and I'll figure out why that's not showing up. I will figure out why before I leave here. I will get that fixed. Let me go on to it. It's I gave you this correlated. Okay, this is the way I wanted it to show, and save as. Well, okay. This particular one, notice that this is a correlated subquery. And basically, I just made it a little bit clearer. I had max up here, and that was kind of a giant leap sideways. It had changed slightly. I will get this file out there and updated correctly. So I'm going to copy it. So this is number 3. Now, notice that everything comes from invoices table. Now, this is a correlated subquery because you see I have an invoice outside and an invoice inside, and where the outside vendor ID is equal to the inside vendor ID. Now, this particular one, I could write this as a table join with a group by. But if I execute this, I get 34 rows. Now, everything is coming from invoices, so I've got invoices and invoices. Now, look what I'm asking you to do in this. Rewrite the query such that it returns the vendor name instead of the vendor ID. What does this mean? Where is the vendor name? In vendors. So now I suddenly have, but I don't have vendors in there anyplace. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have up here in this part of it, in the from line, I'm going to have a table join. Anytime I have data coming from 2 tables, there is no help for me but a table join. So I have to select data from I have to select the vendor name. I have to select the invoice total. I don't have any choice but to have a table join. So Inner join vendors. I've got to get it in there. Now that I have vendors in there, I can select the vendor name. With me? So there's the vendor name, inner join vendors on. That's just a plain old inner join. And then I still have the sub-select on the outside. Questions? Okay, I'm going to pause for a minute here and see if I can get that file to behave correctly for me. Go to the module files, module 8, chapter 6 exercise doc. Well, I see that it was created on January 15th. That's unusual. Okay. So I'm going to do upload. Chapter 6 exercises. Replace. And now I see the time has updated. Upload. Replace. Now, do I have a save on this? So now I'm going to go back to the exercises. Oh. Okay, now I'm seeing that the editing. So now if you'll download that file, you should see the correct file. I don't know, I guess for this class, I just didn't get it saved. So your file should look like, so on number 3, if you go down number 3, it should say edited 329. Does it? Yes? Okay. Groovy. Let's take a look at number 4. Write a select statement that returns 2 columns from the GL accounts table, account number, and account description. The important thing to note, everything's coming from one table. That means pretty well that that this would be a candidate for a sub-select, probably. We shall see. The results set should have 1 row for each account number that has never been used. Where has never been used means it does not appear in the invoice line item. Use a correlated subquery introduced with the not exists. Okay. So I want to use a correlated subquery. What does a correlated subquery mean? I'm going to have a one table in the outer subquery. So clearly my outside one, so this is number 4. Select from where. What table? No, I was chasing down that file. By the way, if you download that exercise file now, you will get the up-to-date version of it. I'm selecting something. In number 4, everything I'm selecting comes from one table. What table is that? Number 4. 2 top columns from what? GL account, yeah. Global ledger accounts or general ledger accounts, I believe, yeah. I'm not sure exactly what that is from an accounting standpoint, but okay, so this is, what is it? Well, I've never been a whole lot into the banking world. I do know that one of the issues they run into with database is that they have a log at each branch, and that log gets written with every transaction. So that's what you call a hot table. Anyway, so coming from the general ledger accounts, where something, okay, I'm going to have to, I'm going to rename it as G because I hate typing. Where not exists, and in other words, there is nothing there. FRPM. How is the GLA account related to the invoice line items? Then they are. Account number. Okay, now here's what makes it a correlated subquery. I'm going to use this one G and this one I. Where G.account number equals I.account number. Exists means where there's such a row, where there's anything in there. Okay. So what happens each time through this outer loop, I'm going to execute this inner loop. Could be down there in the where. Okay, every time through this outer loop, so I'm going to select something. I'm going to select something from G. So I select a row, and every time I check it against, does that row, does there exist anything down here in this? Did I select anything there? Exist says, is that empty? So if it's empty, I want it. So where not exists means then I check this thing. I try to select from the invoice line items where this account number is equal to the one I'm on down here. If I get anything at all, I don't want that one. I only want empty ones. It's not that hard. That's the correlated subquery. I could have done it by a group by having. How could I have written that as group by with a having? And accomplish the same thing. When you see a correlated subquery, think of it as a group by. When it looks something like this, select. What am I selecting? Oh. GL accounts G. I think I can do it with an inner join. Will that do it? I'm not sure. I think I can do it with just an inner join. And let's see if this will do it. Not getting the right number of rows there. I should be getting more rows than that. I'm gonna work on that a little bit during the break and see if I can get that. I'm sure that there is another way to do this besides a correlated subquery, but there is the general format of it. That's the general sketch of it as a correlated subquery. Select, well, obviously I'm gonna select the account number and the account description from the GLA accounts where I get nothing in this select whatever. I could just say select star there from invoice line items where the two account numbers. So as long as I get nothing, that's the one I want. Seems like an inner join ought to work on that, but might have to go to an outer join. I'm gonna mess with it a little bit. Right now, I only really want to do the. This is the answer that I'm looking to see there. So I've pretty well sketched it out for you, kind of what it looks like. Questions? Let's go ahead and look at number 5. I hope this is helpful. Number 5, write a select statement that returns 4 columns: vendor name, vendor ID, invoice sequence, and invoice line item amount for each invoice that has more than one line item in the invoice line items table. And you could use a subquery that tests for invoice sequence greater than 1. I'm going to show you there's a downside to that. So I probably should have said you could use a subquery. I don't know that I would use that subquery because it has some downsides. Now let's go look at the for each invoice that has more than one line item. Let's go take a look at these line items. Invoice line items. This would not have been the way I would have done this. Invoice sequence number. Now notice that invoice 12 has more than one line item. So the invoice sequence number, I got 1, 2, 3, 4 there. The rest of them all just have ones. And then there's another exception right down here. This one has a 1 and a 2. So notice that invoice ID 12 has 1, 2, 3, 4 line items. And invoice ID 78 has 1, 2 line items. So I should see 6 rows in the output based on what I just go look at the data, and this is my test data, and it's small, so I can do that. And so this is what I'm trying to find. Okay. Okay. So 12 and 78 are the 2 qualifying invoices that we want. A total of 6 line items. The output comes from 3 tables. So I want the vendor name, invoice ID, invoice sequence, and invoice line item amount. So what tables am I looking at here? I'm going to have the vendors table. I'm going to have the invoices table. I'm going to have the invoice line items table. No way around it. I've got a 3-way table join here. So in my output, select from, join vendors, so I'm just going to say inner join vendors, invoices, and line items. Now you should know how to do that, right? Okay, just a plain old inner join. Got 3 tables in there on their primary key to foreign key. Where the invoice ID is in, select what? Help me out here. Select what? Well, what am I interested in? I'm saying the invoice ID is in it, so what do I have to select? If I say invoice ID is in this set, what do I have to select to be in that set? Invoice ID. So I'm asking, is the invoice ID in this table? Therefore, I have to select the invoice ID. It doesn't make any sense to select anything else. From invoices, of course, where invoice sequence, I believe it's just plain invoice sequence, it might be invoice sequence number, is greater than 1.
No, it's just a sequence.
Okay. Now, what about that? I'm expecting to get 6 rows. I should have 4 rows for invoice ID 22, wasn't it?
That's only going to be 3.
12. I should have 4 rows for invoice ID 12 and 2 for invoice ID 78. And you said what?
3 on one and 1 on the other.
Okay, I hear you there. What's he talking about, please, Eric? Kathy? What's the problem with this? There's a problem. I want to get 6 rows. What 6 rows will I get? Let me go back to this. Okay, so I'm going to go, let's see, what was that? Invoice line items, right?
Yeah, you're only going to get 13, 14, 15, and 81.
Yeah. Let's see, here's 12. These guys right there are all, I'm going to get 4 rows for 12 because you're going to get what?
Oh, my columns are numbered. Or my rows are numbered.
Oh, you can turn them on.
That's why I said the numbers out the ground.
Well, yeah, you can turn those on. I don't usually, because I don't think of them as being numbered. So right now, the only thing I'm interested in is these guys right here, where the invoice ID is 12. I should get 4 rows. So I want all the rows for any invoice ID that has more than 1 line. So if I say invoice sequence number greater than 1, which of those rows am I going to get? Well, yeah, I'll get I'll get invoice ID 2 and 3 and 4. But I won't get this one. I won't get invoice ID 1. Because why? If you look at it, it will not match my criteria. How can I fix that?
Well, the question suggests using the having statement.
Yes. I can do a group by on invoice ID. I do not have to have an aggregate up there to do it. So if I group where, I can say instead of where, I can group by. Now, if I group by, I don't have to have an aggregate to group. If I have an aggregate, then I have to group by anything that I don't aggregate. But if I just have a field up there, I can group by that field even without an aggregate. So group by what? having count greater than 1. Use count star in that case. Questions? So
having parentheses star is the same as you suggested in this text of using count parentheses invoice ID greater than 1. Is that the same?
right.
The same thing. Just a different way to
I would say just having count star greater than 1. Count invoice ID. Well, I would say count star. I think I wrote it once as a solution and I said count invoice ID, but I would say count star because invoice ID cannot be null. It's a primary key. I think part of the primary key. I would not have written that table that way. Okay. I would not have designed, that is a poorly designed table for several reasons. Notice that there's a lot of duplication in the invoice sequence number. So the primary key has to be the invoice ID and the invoice sequence number. Okay. What I would have done with that table would have been the invoice sequence number would have been the primary key of that table, and the invoice ID would have been a foreign key taking me to the invoices table. Thus, I could easily tell you all of the invoice sequence. There's nothing special about 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't care if it's 23, 52, 96, and -1 for all I care. I would just make that invoice sequence number be unique. That would be the primary key. Notice that this table has a primary key of the invoice ID and the invoice sequence number. I do not like that. Anything I can do to get away from that. So there's no reason why I can't just start numbering my invoice sequence numbers at 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and just keep on going right through them, right through the numbering until I run out of numbers. Because having an invoice sequence number of 1,000,000 doesn't hurt me a bit. Not nearly as much as having to have the dual primary key. So I want that primary key to be one field if there's any way I can. And in this case, it would be pretty easy to get it that way. Okay. So group by having. I don't believe that this one would chop off number 1. So vendors as L, where invoice ID. So all I'm going to do is pull up the only thing I really care about is vendor name, invoice ID. Where the invoice ID is in here, I think if I say where the invoice sequence is greater than 1, in this schema, I would get them all. I will get the 1. It's not true that if I did it this way, it is not true that I would not get invoice sequence number of 1. It's not true that I would only get 3. I think I would get all 4 of them because I'm testing, is the invoice ID in this set? And if there is an invoice sequence of 2, then it will be in that set. Your initial idea was good. And if we went to some other scheme there where the invoice sequence number was the primary key, which would be what I'd do in a heartbeat here, then it would have to be the count, having count split greater than 1. It wouldn't hurt me any in terms of finding all of the invoice line items for invoice ID 12, it'd find those just very quickly, just as quickly as it would with this kind of a setup that we have now. We'd be a whole lot better off because having a primary key is expensive. And we're going to talk about why that is. Having a multi-field primary key is a very expensive, it's a very poor design unless you just have no way around it. So that's something you want to avoid. And we're going to have a whole class on that. Anybody need to take a break? Just about I'm going to continue on and get done a little early. Let's see, we're looking at number 5. What is this? I think that's something that I was working with back before there. This is number 6. I will send you a copy of this file. Number 6 says, what does number 6 says? So this is what I should see. I believe I would get this one even if I said, I like this having the count greater than 1. Let's see, this is not a correlated subquery. Number 6. Write a select statement that returns a table containing a single column with one value per row, representing the sum of the largest unpaid invoices submitted by each vendor. And I'm asking you to use a derived table in that. Now, you could do this with a group by. Could be written without the subselect. But let's think about this. Remember, this says returns a table containing what? A single column with one value per row, representing the sum of the largest unpaid invoice submitted by each vendor. Now, won't this give me that information? Take a look at this, please. I want the largest invoice total from invoices where I'm not interested in zeros. If you don't have any balance due, if you don't have anything there, I'm not interested in you. Okay, I don't want to see a bunch of zeros. Group by vendor ID. Won't this give me the what that's being asked for? What I'm being asked for? One value representing the sum of the largest unpaid invoices. Well, if my balance due is 0, I don't have any unpaid invoices. So a vendor ID and the max of the invoice from invoices where I owe them some money, group by vendor ID. Isn't this going to do it? I'm expecting What am I expecting? I'm expecting to see 8 rows, and I do see 8 rows, and that is vendor ID 37, 72, 80, 83, 106, 110, 122, and 123. What's wrong with that output? What? Right. And this is an example of what you run into in SQL, because I'm explicitly telling you, you can't return more rows. Up until now, we haven't you can't return more fields than more columns than I say in this one, because I'm demonstrating what would happen if we had confidential information. What if that vendor ID were confidential? I could not return it. I'm not allowed to see it. Well, if I can run the query, I can see it. But in the output of this query, I'm going to give it to somebody to run. I'm going to say, it's okay for you to run this, and you run it and you get the output, but I don't want to reveal confidential information. That might be a social security number, okay? Can't give you the social security number. It might be account balance. It might be an account number. I don't want to give you the account number. Okay. So only thing I want to give you is this aggregated total. The only thing you're allowed to see is this column right there, max. I have to get that vendor ID out of there. But what's my problem in that query? That query has to be grouped by vendor ID, so it has to have vendor ID in it. Got a problem. My way around that problem is with a subselect. So in this one, I have a select something from what? Well, it's right there. From this guy. What am I missing? There where I put that green dash, 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 dash. There's a sub piece that if you don't get it in there, it won't work. So this is a derived table. It is not a correlated subquery. It's a derived table. A derived table has one slightly different glitch in it that you have to do. Bingo. Eric, say that again. You have to alias it, or you have to give it a name. It doesn't have a name. It is anonymous. A table has to have a name. So if you're going to select from it, so this outer query, instead of having it down there in the where statement, this one is in the from statement. So from this guy. By the way, I can also have a table in the select line. I can also have a subselect in the select line. That's a little weirder. And our book doesn't do that, and I don't ever use that as much. But I can definitely select from a table. So I have to give this guy a name. I think I had an order by in there, so I'll have to leave something for you to do. But that's what it looks like, right? So notice that this is just a plain vanilla select from where with a group by and an aggregate. Nothing to it. But I'm using the subselect to drop it down. By the way, one other little point here. One other little point. If I'm selecting in the from line, then look at this. I can see that alias, my max. I can select that alias. If I select it from the table, I can group by that alias. So this is a way that you can push the alias up and use it in the where of the outer query. Anything that I have named in this inner query goes up and can be selected if it's a derived table. So it's just like looking into a table and pulling out a field. It is a field of a table. Questions? Let's take a short break. It is 7:17, and let's take about 5 minutes. I just need to run down and get some water in my cup, and I'm going to pause the recording for a minute. Okay, I've just resumed the recording. Let's take a peek at number 7. These aren't completed by any stretch. Let's see. Okay, this is what your output should look like. In this one, you can run your inner query. Remember, I ran that inner query and I got these values. There's 8 values. And if I were to order them appropriately, I would have gotten these numbers. I got these 8 numbers. Just I didn't do an order by. Okay. Let's see, what do we got here? Write a select statement that returns what? The vendor name, vendors, vendor city, vendor state, that is located, whatever that means, located in a unique city and state. In other words, do not include the vendors who share a city and state with any other vendor. Now, I could do this with a self-join. It could be done. And that would be another exercise. So we could think about it as joining vendors with vendors. Everything is coming from one table. So it's pretty much, I'm going to say select, all that jazz, all that, the stuff, the vendor name, the vendor name, city and state. And so that's pretty straightforward. It comes from vendors. Okay. Now, in order to get it with I need to join it with a unique table, with another table. So I'm going to join it with let's see. Okay, so I'm going to do an inner join. Inner join with essentially itself. So it's going to look something like this. And I'm only interested in the vendor city, vendor state having the count greater than 1, and probably instead of saying count vendor ID, I should just say count star there would be better. If I'm only interested in saying the count of the rows, so I say select vendor city, vendor state from vendors. So I'm joining it with the vendor city. Now I need vendor city and state. I need to have both city and state. If all I did was city, I would be vulnerable to the idea of San Diego, Texas, and San Diego, California would both collapse into one row. So I have to have the city and the state in there. Questions? So that's a join. Now I have a derived table here that is joined. This is not a correlated subquery. How do I know it's not a correlated subquery? I don't have an outer table and an inner table that I'm comparing. This is just a derived table. What am I joining on here, by the way? Both of them. Vendor city in the on. V being the top one, so this is the, I've got to name them. So I certainly can have a two-field join, because if the state is different, I don't want it to match as one record. Question. So here I have a derived table inside. I will let you look at this file. And the last one. Okay, I want 4 columns: vendor name, invoice number, invoice date, and invoice total. So as I get that vendor name in there and an invoice number in there, right away I can tell you, what have I got? No way around it. I got an inner join, I've got a join at least, of the invoices and the vendors. There is no way around that. Okay. So, because I have something coming from both tables. 1 row per vendor representing the vendor's invoice with the earliest date. Gee. Well, that's pretty straightforward. Select. Several ways I could do this. Let's just invoice. I can get the other stuff later. Min, date. Well, gee whiz, look what I have here. I've hit that rule. Eric, what do I have up here? Eric, what do I have up here? And this line right there, number 8. Oh my goodness, I got an aggregate function and I got a group by. So I'm gonna have to group by. Don't have any choice here. And what do I have? Sometimes I like not having semicolons because I don't have to put a semicolon to run it. I wouldn't get that. I wouldn't have that much fun if I were an Oracle. Notice I got 34 rows there, and that's the minimum invoice date for each vendor ID. Notice I have see, do I have 900? Yeah, I got 999. Actually, I only have 33 in some of them. This particular one is 34. I'm getting back 34 rows because I have an invalid vendor ID in there. 999 is invalid. The last one down there, he's an invalid one, but I didn't say, I said give me the vendor IDs from invoices grouped by vendor ID. It has an invalid one in there. So we're getting back one extra row in this case, 34 rows from this subquery. That's okay. You're not responsible for that. I'm just pointing it out. You know, we have found that. I guess we need to do something with it. We'll talk about that later. So what is this then? What do I have here? This is the output I want. So basically, this is just a table in my join. So I'm going to join. Usually, inner join is what you say. Join vendors and invoices in the usual way. And as my derived table on what? On probably be the invoices up here, invoices dot I dot and it would be better if I said a dot. This guy, D dot. Are you with me? So I've got the inner join has vendors, it has invoices, and the inner join has this derived table in it. It is from that derived table that I pick up the invoice total. So I need a where. get a better name than M. That is the name that I gave it, so that's the minimum is M. I can have it down there in the where. So what do I need in the select statement? I'm going to have the invoice date selected. Invoice date comes from the invoices. That's okay, it's named invoice date. Down here it's named M, so there's no conflict in the names. And if I'm going to name something like that, I like to avoid using a name that I've already used. So I would call it my minimum or something like that, I mean, in reality. And basically, that's just about it right there. That's 8. Questions? Okay, let me go. Well, Renee, I was going to, unmute you. Okay, Renee, I've turned on your microphone. Do you have any questions?
Not right now.
Okay. We're about to wrap up here. And I'm not going to put this headset on. I'm not going to grade number 7 chapter 8, what I've been going over today for a little while. So you have time to do it. And I'm going to push that file out on an announcement. All right?
Okay.
Okay, I'll turn off your microphone. There. Let's see. With that, I'm going to end the recording here. I'm going to leave the